The Zelthani Confederation had known peace for over 300 years. Their blue-green worlds orbited gentle stars, where crystal cities reflected sunlight across vast oceans. Children played in floating gardens while their parents worked, in harmony with nature. War was something they read about in ancient history books, a relic from primitive times. Then the hegemony came. The first world died in silence. The inhabitants of Zelthani Prime watched their communication feeds go dark from the outer colonies, one by one. No distress calls, no battle reports, just empty static where entire civilizations had existed moments before. When the hegemony fleet finally appeared above their homeworld, Ambassador Keldon understood the terrible truth. These weren't conquerors, seeking resources or territory. They were exterminators. The void-black ships moved with mechanical precision across the star system. Each vessel was the size of a small moon, their hulls absorbing all light like hungry shadows. They positioned themselves above population centers and began their work methodically. Massive energy beams lanced down from orbit, turning cities into glass, oceans into steam, and mountains into dust. There were no demands for surrender, no negotiations, no mercy. Just systematic annihilation. Keldon huddled in the ruins of the planetary capital, his elegant robes torn and stained with ash. Around him, the few surviving members of the Confederation Council worked frantically at damaged communication equipment. They had maybe hours before the hegemony finished sterilizing the planet's surface. The long-range transmitter is operational, announced tech specialist Vern, her 3 eyes dim with exhaustion. But our power cells won't last much longer. Keldon nodded grimly. They had one chance to send a message across the galaxy before their species joined the countless others that had simply vanished without a trace. He activated the emergency broadcast system, knowing that most civilized races would ignore their plea. The hegemony's reputation preceded them. Entire sectors had gone silent after their fleets passed through. "This is Ambassador Keldon of the Zelthani Confederation." He spoke into the transmitter, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "We are under attack by forces seeking our complete extinction. We offer our entire trilithium reserves to any species capable of military intervention. Our coordinates are included in this transmission." Trilithium was the most valuable substance in known space, essential for faster-than-light travel. Their system contained enough to power 10,000 starships for centuries. It was everything they had, everything they could possibly offer. But Keldon knew it wouldn't be enough. The civilized races of the galaxy had learned to avoid the hegemony's path of destruction. Better to lose one system than risk their own fleets in a hopeless battle. The mathematics were simple and cruel. The message traveled across space at incredible speeds, bouncing between relay stations and deep space beacons. Most recipients deleted it immediately upon seeing the hegemony's involvement. Others forwarded it to military commands, who filed it away as another lost cause. The galaxy was full of dying civilizations, crying out for help that would never come. But at the very edge of charted space, where the Milky Way faded into the cold emptiness between galaxies, humanity's third expeditionary fleet received a transmission. Admiral Jack Thompson sat in his command chair aboard the battleship Vengeance, reviewing patrol reports from the frontier. His fleet consisted of 30 ships, all veterans of the border wars that had raged for decades in the Outer Rim. These weren't the shiny vessels that protected Earth's core systems. They were working ships, built for fighting and dying in places the galaxy preferred to forget. Thompson was a hard man who had earned every scar on his weathered face. He had joined the fleet as a young lieutenant, fighting pirates and raiders in forgotten systems. 40 years later, he commanded men and women who understood that sometimes violence was the only answer to certain questions. "Sir, we're receiving a distress call," reported Communications Officer Janet Brooks. "It's from the Zelthani system, about 6 days at maximum burn." Thompson read the transmission carefully. his expression never changing. He had seen genocide before, had fought against species who believed that might made right. But something about this message struck him differently. Maybe it was the dignity in Keldon's voice, or maybe it was just that he was tired of bullies who picked on peaceful civilizations. "Colonel Davis," he said to his second-in-command, "set course for space, maximum burn, and signal the fleet to prepare for combat operations." Colonel Lisa Davis raised an eyebrow. "Sir, the odds don't look favorable. 1,000 ships against 30. Thompson's smile was cold as winter on Earth's polar caps. "Lisa, we've never fought fair in our lives. Why start now?" The human fleet changed course, their engines burning bright against the darkness. They were heading toward either their greatest victory or their final battle, and none of them much cared which it would be. The hyperspace jump ended with a violent shudder that rattled every bolt and rivet in the human fleet. Space twisted and folded as 30 warships materialized above the dying Zelthani homeworld, their angular hulls reflecting the orange glow of burning cities below. These weren't the sleek, graceful vessels that other species built for show. These were weapons forged in the furnaces of human necessity. The flagship Vengeance led the formation, its hull pocked with scars from plasma burns and meteor impacts. Welding marks traced across its armor like battle tattoos, each one telling a story of survival against impossible odds. The other ships in the fleet looked equally battered, the cruiser Iron Wolf missing half its port armor, the destroyer Night Fury sporting patch jobs over what had once been gaping holes. Admiral Thompson stood on his bridge, watching the tactical displays paint a grim picture. The hegemony's advanced scouts were already in system, their massive ships moving with the slow confidence of predators who knew their prey was trapped. Behind them, sensor readings showed the approaching main fleet, over 1,000 vessels of destruction, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Ambassador Keldon's transmission came through on the emergency frequencies, his voice carrying barely contained despair. The tall, graceful alien appeared on the main screen, his usually pristine robes now torn and stained with ash from his dying world. His large, expressive eyes studied the human fleet with growing dismay. "Admiral Thompson, I am grateful for your response to our distress call," Keldon said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "However, I fear there has been some misunderstanding about the scope of the threat we face." Thompson could practically read the alien's thoughts. Here was a species that measured military might by the size and beauty of their ships, the elegance of their formations, the sophistication of their weapons. To Keldon's eyes, the human fleet looked like a collection of scrap metal held together with prayers and stubbornness. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, Thompson's tactical officer, watched the alien's expression from her station. She had seen that look before, on a dozen worlds, the polite disappointment when someone realized that humanity's military didn't match the galactic standard for impressiveness. Rodriguez was a compact woman with calloused hands and intelligent eyes, a veteran of every major engagement the Third Fleet had fought in the past 5 years. "He thinks we're not enough," she observed quietly, not bothering to hide her amusement. "Look at his face. He's trying to figure out how to thank us politely before we run away." Lieutenant Commander Ben Hayes, the fleet's youngest ship captain, laughed from his position at the communications console. "Should we tell him about the Arcturus campaign? Or maybe the siege of New Geneva?" "Let him find out the hard way," muttered Chief Engineer Tom Wilson from his diagnostic station. Wilson was a gruff man who spoke to machines better than people, but his engines never failed when humanity needed them most. "These pretty aliens always think war is about having the biggest ships." Thompson remained silent, studying the tactical situation with the calm focus that had kept him alive through decades of combat. The hegemony's main fleet would arrive within the hour, giving them precious little time to position for the coming battle. But first, he needed to send a message, not just to the aliens approaching to commit genocide, but to the entire galaxy watching from the sidelines. "Open a channel to the hegemony fleet," Thompson ordered, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had never backed down from a fight. The response came quickly. A massive alien figure appeared on screen, its features hidden behind an ornate battle mask that gleamed with embedded technology. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant, filled with the arrogance of a species that had crushed hundreds of worlds without meaningful resistance. "Unknown vessels, you are interfering with a sanctioned cleansing operation," the hegemony commander announced. "Withdraw immediately, or share the fate of these pathetic creatures." Thompson's response was merely a predator's smile, the kind of expression that had evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill you from the moment you were born. He leaned forward in his command chair, his weathered hands steady on the armrests. "This is Admiral Thompson of the Terran Navy," he said, his voice carrying across space with casual menace. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system before we demonstrate why the galaxy fears Deathworlders." The alien commander's laughter echoed across the comm channel, a sound like grinding metal that spoke of supreme confidence. Here was a species that had never known defeat, never faced an enemy that fought back with any real determination. The laughter continued for several seconds before Thompson added his final words. "We've faced worse odds than this before," he said, his tone never changing from conversational calm. "The difference is, we're still here, and they're all dead." The laughter stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, 30 human ships prepared for battle, while 1,000 alien vessels approached through the darkness, completely unaware that they were about to learn what it meant to fight a species that had earned its place among the stars. The hegemony fleet approached the Zalthani system like a dark tide of death, their 1,000 ships moving in perfect formation. Admiral Vorth commanded from his flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Final Judge that stretched 5 kilometers from bow to stern. His species had perfected warfare over centuries, turning the destruction of civilizations into an art form. They expected this to be like every other campaign, swift, clean, and absolutely final. But the human fleet had vanished. "Where did they go?" Vorth demanded, his forearms gesturing at the empty space where 30 human ships had been moments before. His tactical officers scrambled over their instruments, searching for any trace of the primitive vessels that had dared to challenge them. The answer came in the form of plasma fire erupting from the asteroid belt. 3 human destroyers burst from hiding spots among the floating rocks, their weapons blazing as they struck at the hegemony's flanks. Before the aliens could respond, the human ships disappeared back into the maze of asteroids, leaving 2 crippled cruisers spinning helplessly in space. "Cowards," snarled Commander Zeph Worth's second-in-command. "They hide behind rocks, instead of fighting with honor." Vorth was beginning to understand that honor meant nothing to these creatures. As his fleet tried to pursue the human ships into the asteroid field, more attacks came from impossible angles. The humans had turned the entire star system into their weapon, using gravity wells, debris fields, and sensor shadows to strike and fade like ghosts. The destroyer Night Fury suddenly appeared directly above the hegemony formation, diving down like a bird of prey. Its captain had plotted a suicide course straight toward the alien command ship. Defensive fire tore chunks from its hull, but the human vessel never wavered. At the last second, it released its entire payload of nuclear torpedoes before ramming into a heavy cruiser, both ships disappearing in a brilliant explosion that lit up half the system. "Madness," whispered Vorth, watching the expanding fireball. "No civilized species fought like this. No rational beings threw away their lives so carelessly." But the humans weren't done. Boarding pods began launching from hidden positions throughout the system, small craft moving too fast for the hegemony's targeting systems to track. They struck like bullets against the alien hulls, burning through armor with concentrated plasma cutters before disgorging their deadly cargo. Sergeant Mike Johnson kicked through the breach in the hegemony dreadnought's hull, his combat suit sealed against the vacuum of space. Behind him, 20 human Marines followed, their weapons ready and their hearts pumping with the adrenaline that had kept their species alive on the deadliest world in known space. Earth had taught humanity that survival meant being more vicious than anything that wanted to kill you. The aliens waiting inside the ship were tall, elegant creatures with crystalline weapons that fired beams of pure energy. Their armor was beautiful, crafted from materials that cost more than most planets. They had trained for warfare in simulation chambers and academic institutions. They had never faced an opponent who bit, clawed, and fought with broken bones. Johnson's first target fell before it could fire. The human Marine moving with the enhanced reflexes that evolution had given his species. Where other races had developed bigger brains or stronger limbs, humans had learned to think faster, react quicker, and never give up, even when death seemed certain. The corridor became a nightmare of close combat. The aliens' energy weapons were deadly at range, but useless when Johnson grabbed his opponent's arm and snapped it like a dry branch. His fellow Marines spread through the ship like a plague, their smaller size allowing them to move through maintenance shafts and service corridors the aliens couldn't reach. "They fight like animals," screamed the hegemony officer as human forces carved through his ship's defenses. 3 of his soldiers lay dead, their elegant armor cracked and bloody. The remaining defenders were backing toward the bridge, their weapons firing wildly at shapes that moved too fast to track. Tot Colonel Emily Davis heard the transmission from her command post aboard the cruiser Iron Wolf. She was coordinating boarding actions across 12 enemy vessels, watching her Marines turn the tide of battle, one ship at a time. Her scarred face wore a grim smile as she responded to the alien's horrified observation. "That's exactly what we are," she said into the comm system. "Animals that learned to build starships." The truth was simple and terrible. Humanity had spent millions of years learning to kill everything that threatened them. They had fought ice, ages, plagues, natural disasters, and each other. They had turned warfare into instinct, survival into religion, and violence into art. Now they had brought those lessons to the stars. Admiral Vorth watched his perfect formation dissolve into chaos as human boarding parties captured ship after ship. His crews were surrendering, fleeing, or simply refusing to fight opponents who seemed to feel no fear. The humans didn't just want to win this battle, they wanted to hurt anyone who dared threaten innocent people. As another of his dreadnoughts went dark, its crew either dead or captured, Vorth began to understand a terrible truth. He wasn't facing a military force following rules of engagement. He was facing an entire species that viewed extinction as merely another enemy to kill, and they had spent their entire evolutionary history getting very, very good at killing. The hegemony had awakened something that should have stayed sleeping in the dark between the stars. Now they would learn why the galaxy whispered fearful stories about the children of Earth. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and space around the Zelthani homeworld looked like a graveyard of twisted metal and burning plasma. The human fleet was dying, ship by ship, crew by crew, but they were taking the enemy with them in ways that defied all military logic. The destroyer Relentless had been crippled early in the fight, her engines dead, and half her crew evacuated. Captain Jerry Walsh stayed behind with a skeleton crew, using manual controls to guide his ship toward a cluster of hegemony cruisers. The alien vessels tried to destroy the approaching wreck, but Walsh had cut all power except life support, making his ship nearly invisible to their targeting systems. "This is Walsh to all human vessels," he transmitted on the emergency frequency, his voice calm despite the fact that his bridge was filled with smoke and sparks. "Tell my wife I kept my promise. Tell her the bad guys didn't win today." The Relentless struck the enemy formation like a hammer blow, her nuclear reactor overloading in a chain reaction that vaporized 2 alien cruisers and damaged 3 more. The explosion lit up the entire battlefield, casting long shadows across the hulls of the surviving ships. Minutes later, The heavy cruiser Defiant found herself surrounded by 4 hegemony battleships, her armor failing under concentrated fire. Captain Amy Foster looked around her burning bridge at the faces of her crew, young men and women who had followed her into hell, because that was what humans did for each other. "Engineering, give me everything you've got," she ordered, her hands steady on the controls, despite the fact that her ship was coming apart around her. "We're going to ram that command ship." Chief Engineer Dan Cooper's voice came back through the smoke-filled bridge. "Captain, the reactor's already in overload. We've got maybe 2 minutes before she blows." "Then we better make them count," Foster replied, aiming her dying ship directly at the largest enemy vessel. As the Defiant accelerated on her final run, her captain's last words echoed across all frequencies. "For Earth, for humanity, for everyone who can't fight back." The collision tore both ships apart in a spectacular fireball that could be seen from 3 star systems away. The hegemony battleship, 10 times larger than the human cruiser, simply ceased to exist. Where there had been a ship capable of destroying planets, there was now only expanding gas and glowing debris. Admiral Thompson watched the sacrifice from his flagship's bridge, his weathered face showing no emotion even as his heart broke for every crew member he had lost. 18 ships were gone now, their names and crews becoming part of the legend that would follow this battle across the galaxy. He had 12 vessels left against nearly 400 enemy ships that were still combat-ready. Any rational commander would have retreated. Any civilized species would have attempted to negotiate. But Thompson was neither rational nor civilized. He was human, and humans had learned long ago that some fights were worth dying for. "All ships, this is Thompson," he broadcast on the fleet frequency. "Form up on the Vengeance. We're going straight for their command vessel." Captain Lisa Rodriguez, his tactical officer, looked up from her damaged console with fierce pride burning in her eyes. Her uniform was torn and bloodied, her left arm hanging useless from shrapnel wounds, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "It's been an honor serving with you, sir," she said, speaking for every human in the fleet. "My kids will grow up knowing their mother died fighting monsters." "Ramming speed," Thompson ordered, his voice carrying across space to every surviving human ship. "Make every death count. Show these aliens what it means to threaten innocent people." The 12 remaining human vessels formed a tight formation and accelerated directly toward the hegemony flagship. They had no hope of survival, no chance of victory in any conventional sense. But victory wasn't the point anymore. The point was to hurt the enemy so badly that they would think twice before attacking another peaceful world. Admiral Vorth watched in growing horror as the human ships approached his flagship at maximum burn, their crews broadcasting final messages. 2 families they would never see again. His own officers were backing away from their stations, their elegant features twisted with disbelief. "They're all going to die," whispered his tactical coordinator. "Why don't they surrender? Why don't they run?" The answer came in the form of 12 ships that refused to slow down, refused to turn aside, refused to accept defeat even in the face of certain death. Each human vessel was broadcasting on open frequencies now, messages of love to children, promises to fallen comrades, and curses directed at anyone who would harm the innocent. But it was too much for the hegemony crews to comprehend. These were beings who had evolved on garden worlds where predators were rare and death was gentle. They had never faced an opponent who would rather die fighting than live in defeat. The sight of entire enemy crews willingly sacrificing themselves to inflict damage broke something fundamental in their psychology. Panic spread through the alien fleet like wildfire. Ship after ship began breaking formation, their crews refusing orders to engage an enemy that seemed to welcome death as a friend. Within minutes, what had been a disciplined armada became a scattered mob of vessels fleeing in all directions. As the human ships closed the final distance to their target, Ambassador Keldon watched from his bunker on the planet below. He and The surviving Zelthani finally understood what they had witnessed, not just a military engagement, but a demonstration of why the galaxy whispered fearful stories about the children of Earth. The humans hadn't just saved them, they had shown the universe that some species would never bow, never break, and never stop fighting for what was right, no matter the cost. The silence after battle was always the hardest part. Admiral Thompson stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, looking out at a star system that had been transformed into a monument to human stubbornness. Debris from both fleets drifted through, space like metallic snow, each piece telling a story of ships that had died fighting rather than surrender. The final ramming attack had worked better than anyone had dared hope. When 12 human vessels had accelerated directly toward the hegemony flagship with obvious intent to ram, the alien crews had simply broken. The sight of entire enemy crews willingly dying to take their opponents with them had shattered something fundamental in the hegemony's psychology. Their fleet had scattered in panic, leaving behind nearly 200 disabled vessels and thousands of dead. Only 5 human ships remained operational, their hulls scarred and their crews exhausted. The destroyer Nighthawk was running on backup power, her main engines destroyed by plasma fire. The cruiser Iron Fist had lost her entire port weapon array and was venting atmosphere from 17 hull breaches. The others were in similar condition, alive, but barely. Thompson's own flagship looked like it had been through a meat grinder. Entire sections were exposed to space, sealed off behind emergency bulkheads. Half his bridge crew was dead, including Captain Rodriguez, who had died at her post when a hegemony energy beam had torn through the command deck. The Admiral himself wore bandages across his forehead and left arm, souvenirs from flying debris that had nearly taken his head off. But they had won, against impossible odds, with primitive ships and outdated weapons. Humanity had faced down a genocidal armada and sent them running with their tails between their legs. The cost had been terrible, 25 ships and nearly 8,000 human lives, but the Zelthani were safe. Ambassador Keldon's shuttle approached the human flagship slowly, broadcasting peaceful intentions on all frequencies. The tall alien diplomat looked haggard as he stepped aboard the Vengeance, his elegant robes replaced by simple work clothes suitable for a world still recovering from near extinction. His large eyes took in the damage to the human ship with newfound respect. Admiral Thompson Keldon began formally. On behalf of the Zelthani Confederation, I wish to express our eternal gratitude for your intervention. Your sacrifice has saved not just our species, but our entire way of life. Thompson nodded wearily from his command chair, his weathered face showing every one of his 60 years. Around him, his surviving crew worked to keep their ship operational, their movements efficient despite their exhaustion. These were people who had learned to function under impossible conditions, to find solutions when none existed. The promised payment, Keldon continued, activating a holographic display that showed the coordinates of their trilithium mining facilities. Enough refined trilithium to power your entire fleet for decades. It is a small price for what you have given us. Thompson studied the offer for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. The gesture seemed to surprise the alien diplomat, who had probably never encountered anyone who would refuse such wealth. We didn't come here for your resources, Thompson explained, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions that had cost thousands of lives. We came because someone needed killing, and humans excel at that particular skill. The truth was simpler and more complex than the alien could understand. Humanity had spent its entire history fighting against nature, against each other, against anything that threatened their survival. They had learned that sometimes violence was the only answer to certain questions, and they had gotten very good at providing that answer. Lieutenant Tom Wilson, one of the few surviving Marines from the boarding actions, limped onto the bridge, with his left leg in a medical brace. His combat armor was scorched and dented, marked with the blood of aliens who had tried to stop him from completing his mission. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet intensity of a man who had seen too much death in too short a time. Besides, Wilson added quietly, genocide pisses us off. It was such a simple statement, delivered in such casual tones, that it took Keldon a moment to understand the profound truth behind it. These humans hadn't come for profit, or glory, or territorial expansion. They had traveled across the galaxy to fight and die because they couldn't stand the idea of innocent people being murdered. In a universe where most species minded their own business and avoided unnecessary risks, humanity had appointed itself as the guardian of those who couldn't protect themselves. Over the next few days, as human repair crews worked around the clock to make their ships space-worthy, word of the battle spread across the galaxy with the speed of hyperspace communications. The story grew in the telling. 30 human ships had faced down 1,000-ship armada and won through sheer bloody-minded determination. Details were embellished, heroic speeches were invented, and tactical analyses were written by military experts who had never seen combat. But the core truth remained unchanged. Humanity had demonstrated that some species would never bow, never break, and never stop fighting for what was right. They had shown the galaxy that there were still predators prowling the darkness between stars. Predators who had decided that genocide was unacceptable, regardless of the cost of stopping it. As the damaged human fleet finally departed the Zelthani system, their engines burning bright against the cosmic dark, every species in known space understood a simple truth. The Deathworlders were watching from the void, and they had made their judgment clear. Attack the innocent at your own peril, because humanity had proven they would cross any distance and pay any price to make monsters pay for their crimes. The universe had been reminded that Earth's children had conquered the deadliest world in known space before reaching for the stars, and they had brought all their hard-earned lessons about survival with them.